Hello, I'm Karen Giannoni. Welcome to BBC World News Today. In the past few minutes, the Malaysian Prime Minister has confirmed that a piece of aircraft debris is from missing flight MH370.
Experts have conclusively confirmed that the aircraft debris found on Reunion Island is indeed from MH370.
The wing part was washed up on the Indian Ocean island of Réunion last week, the first real clue about the missing Malaysian airliner. We'll also bring you live coverage of a press conference from Paris expected shortly. We're expecting to hear details about exactly what French investigators examining the debris are saying. Another migrant boat capsizes off the Libyan coast with hundreds on board, reports of dozens drowned already. Several ships are on their way to the scene. Criticism of the American plan to take on Islamic State in Syria. We'll have an exclusive interview with a captain in the US who trained opposition forces. Also coming up, 70 years since the world's first nuclear attack on the city of Hiroshima. People across Japan have been marking the somber anniversary, and our correspondent Fergal Keane is there. Hello. Within the last few minutes, the Malaysian Prime Minister has confirmed that the plane debris found on the Indian Ocean island of Réunion last week is from the missing Malaysian airliner MH370, which disappeared 17 months ago. The confirmation came in a statement from Najib Razak, who said, "It is with a very heavy heart that I must tell you that an international team of experts has conclusively confirmed that the aircraft debris found on Réunion Island is indeed from MH370. Now, we're also expecting in the next few minutes a news conference from Paris, where the examination into the wing part has been taking place. When that starts, we will bring that to you live. Well, a short time ago, this is how the Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak confirmed that piece of debris was from MH370.
Today, 515 days since the plane disappeared, it is with a very heavy heart that I must tell you that an international team of experts have conclusively confirmed that the aircraft debris found on Reunion Island is indeed from MH370. We now have physical evidence that, as I announced on 24th March last year, flight MH370 tragically ended in the southern Indian Ocean. This is a remote, inhospitable, and dangerous area. And on behalf of Malaysia, I would like to thank the many nations, organizations, and individuals who have participated in the search. The burden and uncertainty faced by the families during this time has been unspeakable. It is my hope that this confirmation, however tragic and painful, will at least bring certainty to the families and loved ones of the 239 people on board MH370.
Najib Razak, the Malaysian Prime Minister. Our correspondent Jennifer Pack is following the story from the capital, Kuala Lumpur. Jennifer, after all these months of uncertainty, finally one firm piece of information.
Indeed, but many families and relatives that we've spoken to have already said that it doesn't really give them much answers to their most pressing questions since day one, which is, why did this plane disappear and what happened to it? This piece of debris, they say, only points to the fact that authorities need to keep looking. And we have to emphasize that at this point in time, Malaysian authorities have not said where exactly or what more information they have on this piece of debris. Hopefully that will come out from Paris today, from France today. But of course, there are lots of family members here who are still very doubting the Malaysian authorities and the information they are given, because they don't believe authorities are telling them everything that they know.
Jennifer, what happens now with the investigation? How is the responsibility divided between the various nations involved?
Well, Malaysia is still firmly in control of the overall investigation. It is in charge of the criminal investigation, which I have to add is still, according to officials, ongoing, but they haven't really given any updates as to what they have come up with yet. At the same time, the Australians are leading the search in the southern Indian Ocean. They've already indicated that this piece of debris, if it is confirmed to be part of MH370, will not alter their search, and they've said that all of the sophisticated equipment and vessels that they have out there scoring the deep sea looking for this aircraft will continue into the winter months. You have the French authorities now looking into the debris that is washed up on Reunion Island, and they will continue that as well. So of course there are many different countries involved in this process, but Malaysia says that they are firmly in control. You saw that the Prime Minister had to come out first with the most important news, which is to confirm that this debris does belong to MH370.
Yeah, and we're still waiting for that news conference in Paris to get going, Jennifer, as you mentioned. I mean, just take us back to March last year. What do we know about the final moments of that flight, and what are the theories, the strongest theories that have been put forward about what happened?
Well, this started out as a routine flight from Kuala Lumpur heading to Beijing, and just shortly after an hour into the flight, though, it turned back and it did not reach Vietnam airspace. It turned west, and then, according to authorities here, it then turned sharply south through the Straits of Malacca and headed deep into the southern Indian Ocean. And the reason they believe this, even though the communication systems on the aircraft had been turned off, is that they say they relied on these pings coming from the aircraft that was bouncing off satellite dishes. This is a technology that had not been used before to track an aircraft, simply because it's never happened before that both communication systems had been turned off on the plane. And they said that it could have landed anywhere from Indonesia up north into Kazakhstan, all the way from down south, then in Southeast Asia down to the southern Indian Ocean. And for a while, many of the authorities were looking in various parts of the ocean around the world, causing a lot of confusion. In the end, authorities say they are now certain it landed in the southern Indian Ocean. And of course, you heard from the Prime Minister said that this piece of debris does confirm they had been looking in the right place. Of course, a lot of the relatives, though, really doubt this theory, because you have to understand that this trust between Malaysian authorities and families had been lost right from the beginning, simply because they had not been informed for many hours when the plane had been lost from radar contact. And then, as it turned out in the preliminary report, it took them quite a number of hours before they even called a search. They started searching in the South China Sea, scoring that for many days before they started looking on the west side of peninsular Malaysia in the Straits of Malacca, even though authorities said they had heard very early on that the plane may have turned back. So many family members here believe that the officials here, the Civil Aviation Department, the military, somebody fell asleep at the switch and didn't catch on to the fact that this aircraft had turned away from and deviated from its original path. And they're asking a lot of questions which they haven't gotten any answers to it. So of course there are lots of speculation about the disappearance of this aircraft. One of the most popular ones that many of the relatives here believe is that the plane somehow landed safely on an island somewhere, and that passengers may have gotten off. And that's why you're starting to hear relatives, especially those from China, who make up the majority of the missing passengers, their relatives say that they believe their loved ones somehow managed to survive, and they say this piece of debris does not prove that their loved ones are gone.
Jennifer, we're just looking at that piece of wing, this thing called a flaperon that turned up last week on the shores of Réunion. Just give us a sense of how this dominated the news there, what people's reaction was when this first possibly bit of tangible evidence came out of the blue.
Well, initially, of course, the relatives were very skeptical because there have been many false alarms before. And indeed, Malaysian authorities had been very cautious and even urging people to stop speculating until they can confirm definitively that it belongs to MH370. The news trickled out very slowly, but of course, the media in other parts of the world, especially in Europe, had been way in advance and much further than what Malaysian authorities had been willing to reveal. And so that's why you have a lot of relatives who had started shutting off the news from Malaysian officials. They say they're not getting any advanced information, even though they are the relatives, including this announcement. Although Malaysia's Prime Minister said that the relatives had already been informed, I've been in touch with one family member who said that he hadn't heard anything up until the moment the Prime Minister had been giving the address. He had heard from somebody else, another relative, who said they got the call to say that the aircraft wing was confirmed to belong to MH370. So you see this kind of distrust building up between family members against the Malaysian officials. And so this news of a piece of debris didn't excite them initially. But as days went on, though, of course, so many experts came out and said there are no other Boeing 777s that were lost or crashed in this part of the world, that it had to be MH370, that some of them started to make some mental preparations, if you will, about this. But again, as I say, their main concern is that the authorities will now stop looking or searching for the aircraft or looking for the black box, because of course they still need more answers. Of course, Malaysia's Prime Minister has said that nothing of this sort will happen. They have always said they are fully committed to finding out everything about this aircraft until they could determine what exactly happened and who was responsible.
And Jennifer, I mean, the place where this piece of wing turned up, it is 3,700 kilometers from where it's thought to have gone down. How does the search now change for the rest of the debris?
Well, as I said, the Australian authorities who are leading the search in the southern Indian Ocean says that this search does not affect, or this news, the confirmation about the debris, will not affect their search. They say where this piece of debris was found is consistent with their analysis of how the ocean currents take place, that it's possible they could have swept the piece of debris up to Reunion Island. Of course, officials are still looking to see if there are any more on the tiny island, but as you've heard from our colleagues earlier, this is a very small place. The shores are very small. It's possible that debris could be floating up in other parts in the area, and that's why Malaysia's government has asked for help from surrounding authorities to be on the lookout for any other possible debris. But of course, authorities say they will continue the search in the southern Indian Ocean. It's very difficult, though, as you say, the fact that this piece of debris was found so far away from where the original search is, to understand how exactly this is still the right place to be looking, because you have to understand it's been almost 17 months now and they hadn't found any shred of evidence until now. You can't blame some of the family members who have not gotten any kind of technical briefing or any briefing or access to any of these experts to explain to them how the authorities came up to this, that they start doubting the authorities and start doubting whether this piece of debris really does belong to MH370. There's a sense that perhaps authorities are trying to rush it through to try to say that they did find the aircraft, and perhaps very shortly afterwards say, well, we're going to stop searching because we've already determined it crashed in the southern Indian Ocean. This is a conclusion that many family members, I could tell you, will not accept.
Jennifer, for the moment, thank you. Jennifer Pack there, reporting live from Kuala Lumpur, and we're going to keep bringing you any developments on that story as soon as we get it. And we're still watching the room where that news conference is going to be taking place in Paris, and still looking for movement on that front. We will bring it to you in just a minute. Now, as we've been hearing from Jennifer, flight MH370 disappeared from radar screens a year and a half ago. Our correspondent Theo Leggett reports on the events that led up to the plane crash and the months of searching for the wreckage.
MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur at 41 minutes past midnight on the 8th of March last year, heading for Beijing. On board were 227 passengers and 12 crew. 40 minutes into what seemed to be a normal flight, as the aircraft headed into Vietnamese airspace, Malaysian Air Traffic Control wished the crew good night.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
Moments later, the aircraft's main radar transponder was switched off, and it disappeared from controllers' screens. Its ACAS system, which would normally pass technical data about the condition of the plane to ground stations using a satellite network, also stopped making its usual transmissions. But MH370 kept on flying. Tracked by military radar, it veered sharply off course, heading back across Malaysia and out into the Malacca Strait. It then disappeared from military screens as well. We know it stayed in the air for many hours, though, because the ACAS system, although it was effectively switched off, did continue to send very basic signals to the satellite network. Analysis of these allowed investigators to conclude that the plane must have come down somewhere along a narrow arc in the southern Indian Ocean. Weeks of searches from the air revealed nothing but false leads. Since then, seagoing vessels have been combing thousands of square miles of sea floor using sophisticated equipment in an effort to find the remains of MH370. We now know that this part did indeed come from the wing of the missing plane, but until the rest of the aircraft can be found and its flight recorders recovered, we might know what happened to it, but we'll be little closer to finding out why. Theo Leggett, BBC News.
Well, Theo is with me now. And Theo, will this give new impetus to the search effort?
I think it will, because that search effort has been going on for a year and a half. Nothing had been found until now. There had been all sorts of questions asked about the amount of money being spent on it and whether the search was taking place in the right area. Now, although this piece of wreckage turned up on La Réunion, which is thousands of miles away from the area that's being searched, it isn't inconsistent with that theory. In fact, the piece has been in the water for a long time. Ocean debris can travel thousands of miles. You can see bits and pieces from the Asian tsunami, for example, travelling halfway around the world. So it in fact gives some credibility to the theory that this was where the aircraft went down. And there is an awful lot at the moment that we don't know.
Theo, just as you pause there, let's just take you straight to Paris, because we think the Deputy Prosecutor, Serge Makiovac, is about to give that statement. He is the presiding judge overseeing the investigation. Let's listen in.
And this briefing is about the finding of a wing part in La Réunion last week. I will first remind you about the legal framework of the investigation, and then I will tell you the preliminary results of the examination. On the 11th of March last year, the Paris Prosecutor's Office opened an investigation into the accident. 239 people were on board, including 4 French nationals. The presence of French victims was the basis for the French case. The French authorities began investigations. In May last year, we started an investigation for involuntary manslaughter and then for hijacking, causing the death of various people in relation with a terrorist act. This allowed French judges to pursue any lead. Several judges were named to lead the inquiry, including an anti-terrorist judge. The 3 judges were told about the latest discovery last Wednesday in La Réunion. This flaperon was taken to the French investigators in Balma to be examined. On Monday, the judge met several representatives from the Malaysian authorities, as well as Chinese and Australian officials and French experts. This afternoon at 3 p.m., the examination began in Balma in the presence of one of the investigating judges. There was also a representative of the prosecutor's office. The investigation is being conducted by an expert in aviation who has been named by the investigative judge. And the investigation is being conducted under his authority. There were also representatives from Boeing also present at the investigation. There were various people designated by the other countries involved in the case. People from Malaysia, a representative from Malaysia Airlines, Chinese, British, Singapore, various other nationalities involved.
Et la France, en l'occurrence, pour la France, un expert du bureau d'enquête et analyse pour la sécurité de l'aviation civile. Sur place, à Balma,
piece was examined. We can now say today that there are very strong indications that the flaperon that was found on La Réunion on the 29th of July did belong to the 777 Boeing MH370 that disappeared in March last year for two reasons. The representative from Boeing confirmed that the flaperon did come from a 777 because of its specific characteristics, such as the structure and the color. Second reason, the representatives from the Malaysia Airlines and communicated elements from the papers of that particular flight. And on that basis, we could match the piece that we examined and the flaperon of that particular flight. The characteristics matched. These very strong indications need to be confirmed by further analysis that will start tomorrow at the laboratory. I cannot right now tell you exactly when the result from this analysis will be known. They will try to do that as soon as possible in order to provide a total, reliable information to the family of victims.
Durant son transport. Il a fait
the French criminal authorities will also
informer du résultat des expertises et des investigations. Je vous remercie.
That is the Deputy Prosecutor, Serge Makiowak, giving a news conference. He's the presiding judge overseeing the examination of the wreckage, which is happening in France. So therefore, this coming from Paris. And Theo Leggett is still with me. Theo, saying there very strong indications, not quite saying this is definitely it, but saying we will confirm more tomorrow. Yes, more caveated than the Malaysian Prime Minister's statement, but nevertheless giving every indication that this part did indeed come from Malaysian MH370. And the very fact that they've confirmed that this was a flapper-on from a Boeing 777 is a pretty strong indication in itself, because no other 777s have been lost over water in this way, and it's hard to see where else a flap like this could have come from. But the question remains, how did the aircraft get there? If we assume, as every indication suggests, that this was MH370, how did it get to be thousands of miles off course in the southern Indian Ocean when it should have been travelling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing? The aircraft went blind on radar screens, its transponders were turned off, it deviated from its course, and it kept on going for several hours. Now, when they look at this piece and analyse it further, they'll be able to see whether or not there was, for example, any indication of an explosion or a fire or any kind of mechanical stress. It's unlikely they'll find anything like that, because how would it carry on flying for 6 or 7 hours if that were the case? Theo, just 1 second while we say goodbye to our viewers on BBC4 in the UK. You can carry on watching coverage on the BBC News channel. Thanks very much for watching. But of course, if you're watching on BBC, craft found off the island of Réunion is that from the flight MH370, which disappeared last March. A French prosecutor just in the last few minutes, not putting it quite so strongly, saying that there are very strong indications, 2 different facts confirmed or nearly confirmed. But Theo Leggett is with me to discuss this. And Theo, I mean, what exactly can one small part like that tell them? I mean, what could, if it keeps on being examined, what secrets could it yield, if any? Well, there is a limit to what it can reveal, because this is a fairly small part of the aircraft. Really, what the authorities need is to find larger pieces of wreckage. If possible, they need to find the fuselage wherever it is, deep underwater, because there or near there, they should also find 2 items: the cockpit voice recorder, which records all the sounds from the pilots and warnings in the cockpit and so on, but most importantly of all, the flight data recorder, which records a whole gamut of flight data, sensors, control positions, all that kind of thing. And those 2 items taken together should create a real picture of what happened to this flight. But until they find the plane, they can't find those items. And we were discussing earlier the implications of this nearly certainty that this was from flight MH370, what that does for the rest of the search effort, that huge expanse that we saw being examined of the South Atlantic Ocean for so many months last year. Well, it's still going on. It is a very, very large area to search. I think about 60,000 square kilometres have been searched so far, and in great detail. They've mapped out the ocean floor, an area that had never been mapped before. They've found all sorts of undersea obstacles, ravines, volcanoes, that kind of thing. It's an immense challenge, and some of that might have to be gone over again. You remember that a few years ago, an Air France aircraft went down off the coast of Brazil. It was known roughly where that aircraft went down because wreckage had been found, but it still took 2 years to locate the wreck. That's an indication. It tends to reinforce the fact that the searchers are probably looking in the right area, but they're still looking for a needle in a haystack. It is a very, very difficult challenge. But what happens now? Investigators have pretty much assumed for a long period that the aircraft was thousands of miles off course, that it flew into the southern Indian Ocean, it ran out of fuel, it crashed, and that will give new impetus to the search. Because one of the problems has been, if you spend months and months and months searching for things, millions of dollars are being spent and there are no results, then questions will be asked about whether or not the search is justified. This may help convince some people that the search is justified at the moment. Already we were hearing when we spoke to Jennifer Pack immediately after the Malaysian Prime Minister gave the announcement this was from MH370, the lack of trust in what the authorities are telling people that has developed over these months among the relatives.
Yes, and I think that's why the French have been so cautious with their press conference today. I think the discrepancies, incidentally, between what the Malaysians are saying and what the French are saying may upset some people as well, unless it's confirmed beyond all doubt relatively quickly that this part came from MH370. But yes, there are many people out there who simply don't believe that the theory of where MH370 went down was correct. So that's why the French authorities will have got together people from Malaysia, China, Britain, Singapore, all the interested parties, representatives of Boeing, all in one room with a judge in charge of it all, so that nobody can say that the theory which is being developed, that this part did come from MH370, was made up, that it was somehow another conspiracy.
Just tell us what we heard there in the news conference about how this near confirmation came about that this belonged to MH370.
Well, the evidence from Boeing seems to be that it had the structure and the characteristics of a flaperon from a Boeing 777. Now, this is an advanced aircraft. It uses carbon composites, for example, in the manufacture of something like the flaperon. That may be one reason, incidentally, why this item's been found, because it's made of a very lightweight material that would float for longer than metallic components. There's also the structure, how it was made, so they can tell, they're experts in all of this, that this did come from a Boeing 777. And it seems that there's some correlating evidence from Malaysian Airlines, possibly a serial number, that's been found, which matches up with what the engineers at Boeing are saying. But the very fact it is a 777 flaperon is a very powerful indicator that it came from MH370.
And such an international effort. We just heard there, and you mentioned the number of countries involved, the number of organisations involved, as you might expect in an incident involving international air travel. And
in an incident involving the deaths of 239 people, because I think this aircraft disappeared a year and a half ago. There has been no trace of it. Now a piece of wreckage has been found, almost beyond doubt that it's a piece of wreckage from the aircraft. At least that should give a little bit of closure to the relatives of those on board, and perhaps put to bed some of the more outlandish conspiracy theories which have been gathering momentum over the past few months, suggesting that this aircraft didn't crash into the ocean at all, that it was hijacked, taken somewhere else entirely. I think the evidence, the physical evidence that we have now, should help to at least put some of those theories to rest.
Theo, thank you very much for the moment. Theo Leggett reporting on the developments that we've learnt in the last hour. Now, let's just take you back to the moment that the Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak confirmed that the piece of debris was, in fact, from missing flight MH370.
Today, 515 days since the plane disappeared, it is with a very heavy heart that I must tell you that an international team of experts have conclusively confirmed that the aircraft debris found on Reunion Island is indeed from MH370. We now have physical evidence that, as I announced on 24th March last year, flight MH370 tragically ended in the southern Indian Ocean. This is a remote, inhospitable, and dangerous area. And on behalf of Malaysia, I would like to thank the many nations, organizations, and individuals who have participated in the search. The burden and uncertainty faced by the families during this time has been unspeakable. It is my hope that this confirmation, however tragic and painful, will at least bring certainty to the families and loved ones of the 239 people on board MH370. They have our deepest sympathy and prayers. I would like to assure all those affected by this tragedy that the government of Malaysia is committed to do everything within our means to find out the truth of what happened. MH370's disappearance marked us as a nation. We mourn with you as a nation. And I promise you this, Malaysia will always remember and honor those who were lost on board MH370.
Najib Razak, well, we now have then confirmation from Malaysia's Prime Minister that the debris is from the missing Malaysian airliner. Where does the investigation go from here? Our correspondent, Richard Westcott, has this assessment.
Since last Thursday, the focus of the investigation has been around a piece of wing called a flaperon. Now, there's one on each side, and they move around to help the pilot control the aircraft. Now, it's a big piece. It's about 6 feet long, but it's hollow inside, which is why it floated. And here is the actual flaperon that they discovered. You can see it's covered in barnacles, and that shows it's been in the sea for at least a year. It washed up on this remote French island in the middle of the Indian Ocean called Reunion Island. It's 2,500 miles away from where 2 ships armed with sonar kit are still searching the seabed for the main body of the plane. Now, incredibly, that huge distance has reassured investigators that they're looking roughly in the right place. Because if you look at these currents and the winds, that would carry the flotsam north and then west across the ocean. And that means that nearly a year and a half later, it might make land in Mauritius, Madagascar, even as far away as South Africa. And have a look at this computer model. The red dots show the area where there might be more debris. But after all this time, we're probably just talking about seat cushions, life jackets, tray tables, lost in all that water. Given enough time, absolutely everything will sink.
Richard Westcott reporting there now, where we were hearing earlier from that news conference, the investigator in Paris giving the French findings. Let's go to Paris and talk to our correspondent Hugh Schofield. And Hugh, French investigators sounding slightly more cautious than what we heard from the Malaysian Prime Minister.
Yes, slightly unsatisfactory, I think, from the point of view of those who are wanting a confirmation, a definitive confirmation, because the deputy prosecutor of Paris is obviously reluctant to say anything definitive. I don't think this in any way takes away from the certitude which we should all have now that this is the plane, but he is performing in true legal style and not saying anything absolutely surely, and no doubt he's quite right to do that for all sorts of judicial reasons. What we can say is that certainly everything leads to the deduction that this plane is the one, but we can't be demonstrated yet, and that will no doubt come in the coming days when the tests are performed. I think what people were expecting, I certainly was some kind of flesh on the bones of this. The Malaysian Prime Minister having said that we're sure, then maybe the prosecutor would say, well, we're sure because of this and because of that. But he didn't. He just said that certain technical details were brought by Malaysian officials from their airlines that corroborated the thesis, but he refused to say categorically that it is the piece. So a certain degree of frustration still here, but I think we've just got to put that down to the very cautious approach typically taken by people in this in his profession, at the top of his profession like this.
And why is France playing such a major role in this investigation into what happened to a Malaysian plane?
Well, I mean, there have been, I know, some sort of toing and froing at a very high diplomatic level over all of this, because the Malaysians do feel that they should have right to the piece of the aeroplane, but the French are acting because they have a judicial investigation of their own underway, and we heard the prosecutor explain all of this very shortly after the crash. In typical French fashion, an investigation was opened here because there were 4 French victims of the crash. So it's an investigation, a kind of open-ended investigation into terrorism and the possible hijacking of a plane and so on. The kind of open-ended investigation that allows prosecutors to do examining magistrates to do what they will when things turn up. And now something has turned up on French soil. Réunion is part of French national soil. So quite naturally, the French say, well, we will now pursue this as a priority, though in full coordination with and with full openness towards the Malaysians and Chinese and the Americans and so on, who are obviously very much involved as well.
And what sense do you get of what happens now with the French part of the investigation?
Well, I think we've had, the excitement is kind of over now, and I think we're just going to have to put up with a long, long wait. And there's absolutely no reason to expect a quick result of any of this. I imagine in the coming days there will be confirmation that it is the MH370 Boeing, but we can say that we know that already. And then, well, I mean, it could be months or years even before we get this piece to talk. I mean, what they're going to be looking at are the, at a kind of molecular level at how the flaperon broke off. They're going to be looking at whether it was twisted off, whether it kind of snapped off. They're going to be looking for elements that might show that there was an explosion on board, all sorts of things which we should not be in any hurry to hear the results of.
Hugh, thanks very much. Hugh Schofield reporting live from Paris. Let's go to Kuala Lumpur, where the Malaysian Prime Minister gave that statement just under an hour ago, and talked to Jennifer Pack. Jennifer, the early hours of the morning there now, but what sort of reaction has there been?
Well, of course, the family members had gathered earlier, even before the press conference, or whether they even before they even knew there could be a press conference. And they said that this has been a roller coaster ride for them. The wife of the in-flight supervisor, Patrick Gomez, on MH370, Ms. Jaquita, said that she felt a mixture of nervousness, anxiety, anger, and sadness. And that pretty much sums up what many of the family members have been feeling for more than 16 months now, because they still, to this day, have so many questions. And the fact that this piece of debris is now confirmed to be MH370 doesn't really go to answer some of this, which is the crucial questions, which are what happened to the aircraft, why did it disappear, and who was responsible. Now, Malaysian officials say that the criminal investigation is still ongoing, but they haven't given any updates on that yet, any kind of new information. And you can understand why it's been so frustrating for the family members here, who continue to be frustrated to this day. I have to tell you that throughout this long day, they have not had any sense whether they were going to hear from officials. They weren't sure whether there was going to be a press conference. All of this came through media officials, and they were telling the family members if they could go and interview them and get some reaction. So many of them feel very frustrated. They feel disconnected from officials here, and they don't think that they're getting all of the information. Some of them still believe that Malaysian officials are hiding the truth from them, even though Prime Minister Najib says they will do everything to find out what happened to the aircraft.
How much pressure has there been on the Malaysian government, Jennifer, from within Malaysia itself and, of course, from countries like China? China lost so many of its citizens.
Well, there's a huge amount of pressures on authorities here to give more answers, and what families have been pressing them time and again is to sit down with them privately, to show them all of the data that they have on hand. Even though officials here say they have disclosed everything, they have been nothing but transparent, many of the family members here doubt that. And I have to say that aside from the fact that they haven't found the plane yet, that they've only found a fragment of it at this moment, but they haven't really found the black box. They don't know any more information since day one. There are so many questions that family members have. For example, why did it take 4 hours before officials even called a search? Because if you will remember, in the early days, it first started out in the South China Sea, and even when officials knew that the plane had turned back, it didn't call off the search on that part of the ocean. It then slowly, almost a week into the search, then went over to the Straits of Malacca, and then finally rested in the southern Indian Ocean. And many family members believe it was too late. Somebody fell asleep at the switch. And yet, until this day, no Malaysian official has ever come out to formally answer these questions. And it's not surprising. This is a country with a governing coalition that has been in power since the British left almost 6 decades ago. It is in control of the mainstream media, and they will give information as and when they feel the need to. So the very fact that they're even giving press conferences related to this topic, not a day later, but on the same day, is already seen as being very transparent here in Malaysia. Of course, it is not enough for the families of the missing passengers who are not Malaysians, especially Chinese relatives. Some of them are so frustrated they have come and flown on their own money to come to Malaysia to pressure officials to give them more answers. Unfortunately, to this day, they have not gotten many that they're satisfied with.
And Jennifer, what does this key piece of information do for those relentless searches of such large areas of the ocean? Where does this leave the efforts?
Well, the Australian authority, which is leading the search in the southern Indian Ocean, said that the finding of this debris, even if it's confirmed to be MH370, doesn't necessarily change their search. They say it is consistent with their analysis, that it shows that it's possible this piece of debris could have washed up on the French island of Réunion if it had crashed in the southern Indian Ocean. And they've already given updates saying that they have equipped all of the vessels, very high-tech vessels, to continue the search deep into the ocean. You'll have to remember that the part of the world that they're searching in right now, there's almost a whole mountain range below sea level, and it's very difficult. There are lots of crevices, dark places that pieces of, for example, the black box could be hiding in, and it's been very difficult for officials to find any kind of concrete information. And in the early days, there were many false leads, and that's why officials were initially so reluctant to give much more information about this piece of debris, simply because they say there have been too many false alarms, that they need to be sensitive to the needs of the family members themselves. But of course, this search is still ongoing, and we understand that the vessels have now been equipped for the winter months as well, to continue searching day in, day out until they find the black box, until they know more about what happened to this aircraft.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you very much. Jennifer Pack there, live from Kuala Lumpur, after the news that that piece found off Réunion was from the missing airliner MH370. Stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come.